my new MCL member, Ricardo from Sao Paulo, is here. So, Ricardo, you take the prize for being the most distant person to show up.
Thank you, John. I
So,
thought you would take the prize of taking notes.
yeah. Uh,
Appreciate the warm welcome, guys.
all right, so here we are. Officially welcome to the October 2024 Mid-Career Lab monthly Q&A call with special guest today, Maureen Clough, who is joining us from Seattle and is going to share some of her wild experiences in and out of corporate America and her new career. If it is that, if you're willing to call it that.
Yes, it is.
As a podcaster, creator, solopreneur, and adventurer in the digital economy. So
who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought? So the agenda today, as those of you know who've been here before, is really to engage in an open conversation, and we'll certainly talk to Maureen about what she's been up to and the podcast and some of the issues around ageism that we are all dealing with on a daily basis. And but the goal here is to hear from you and to really engage with all of you on the call to answer questions and really support you in your own career goals at these during these crazy times. So having said that, let's just kind of start off and go around, some familiar faces, some new faces. If anyone wants to kind of jump in and say hello and share a little bit about why they're on the call. If this is your first time, I think we'd all love to hear from you.
I am Allison Roscoe. I live in formerly stormy Orlando.
Oh my goodness. How are you doing this morning? Is it past?
Yes, it is past. We are good. We thankfully did not lose any power or anything substantial. We lost some, branches out of our tree. So
great.
So happy to be here. I got laid off from my job in June, and I'm trying to figure out my next path, my career, and encountering ageism. I am only 53, and I didn't think I'd encounter it for some time, but here we are. So I discovered this because of Maureen. I started following her on LinkedIn, and I found this. So here I am.
Great. Hey, Allison, were you on the call yesterday on the Age Awareness Day call?
I meant to, but I was doing hurricane prep.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
that was more important than our call for sure.
And then I was on another call and I got a tornado warning, and I was like, okay, gotta go. Tornado warning.
Yeah. Hard choice.
Yeah.
The reason I mentioned that is because I think we covered this on the call yesterday, but you're 53, and one of the stats that was introduced yesterday, I think by our co-panelist Bradley Sherman, is a recent survey of, I think it was UK recruiters, who said that for the most part, the preponderance of them said that 57 is their cutoff. 57 is too old. 57 and above, too old.
Yep. I said that yesterday. It was the Financial Times article that came out on October 8th, the day before Ageism Awareness Day. 57, too old, 50% of recruiters in the UK. So it's a big
There's
problem.
another one coming out in the Telegram too, and it's going to have similar statistics.
I
gotta
Vern,
I kind of got a pre-copy of that.
Like.
Yeah, aren't you glad I'm not trying to find work in the UK?
Oh man.
Well, as if it's any better.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say, I don't think we're doing better. Yeah, unfortunately. No. Wish we were.
But
we will.
I will be. Yeah. I'm waiting for the recording so that I can watch yesterday's.
It's live. Yeah. You can watch me fumble with the tech live and have my boomer pal here, John, fix it. It was like, this wasn't scripted. We didn't do this on purpose. It was people are going to accuse us of that, I'm sure, John, because it was perfect illustration of how ludicrous those ageist stereotypes are. But it was great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wow. And I have to say, my 88-year-old in-laws are still fantastic with technology.
So, I love that.
You can still learn.
So just one more point about the 57. Is that if statistically, if you turn 60 today, your early 60s today, you have a better than 25% chance of living past 90. And each year you age past 60 and 65 improves your chances of living to or past 90. So that means that if you're retiring, if you're done at 57 or 60, then you're going to be spending a third of your life in retirement. And
Wow.
I don't necessarily think that that's what we intended or what we want or can afford.
No,
So we're
none
at
of those
this
things.
real inflection point here in our culture, our business culture, and the culture at large around what it means to grow older, and a lot of definition being challenged. And here we are on the call to talk about this. So I'm just going to pivot now to Maureen and give you the floor. And I've got some questions. We've talked about some stuff before, but let's start kind of with the background and what kind of got you into work in the first place. I know you started out as a journalist. You developed into a career in partnerships in technology. So tell us a little bit about that evolution, and then about how you you kind of ejected yourself from that, or got ejected, and then basically forged this path ahead on your own.
Yeah, this wasn't how things were supposed to go, as it turns out. That's kind of how life is, right? But I wanted to be a journalist, and so I started out in broadcast journalism in New York City. I was an associate producer at Court TV, and I was creating stories for and writing scripts for Savannah Guthrie, who's now the Today Show anchor, which is wild, like crazy meteoric rise from Court TV news breaks to Today Show anchor. Wow. But so while I was there, I got really a front row seat to the realities of working in television news. And if you want to do on-air talent, you have to move to the middle of absolutely nowhere and get a job for probably $8 an hour with no health insurance. And you're at the whim of a news director and whether someone leaves or goes. And it's just, you really weren't in any way, shape, or form in control of your own destiny. And that was not sitting well with me. And I was like, maybe this is not it. Not only that, I noticed that for women specifically in broadcast journalism, you age out like really, really quickly. And so men are allowed to go and, go gray on the air, and women are kind of pushed out at, probably 40, 45, and they're replaced by younger anchors and reporters. So I just thought it as a career limiting move to stay in broadcast journalism. So I started to look around for what else I could do. And I hate to say it, but it wasn't at all intentional, my move into tech. It was literally back in the days of monster.com, where they required a resume and a cover letter for a lot of jobs. And I was in my 20s, my early 20s in New York City, and my priorities were kind of just having a good time, to be honest. And so I threw my resume in at companies that didn't require a cover letter, and Bloomberg had me come in for an interview, and somehow they accepted me as a person on their sales team. So I accidentally fell into the tech world. And then once I got there, I just, I was part of the generation where they told you could do anything and keep climbing the career ladder and all of that. And I just kept doing that and found myself in tech partnerships. I went from sales to business development and partnerships. And for a people person like me, it was a really good fit. It was kind of fun, more innovative. You were working to create new paths that were forged between distinct entities, and it was a big challenge. It was a long-term sort of business plan rather than, sort of the more rote, like cut and paste element of sales, which I'm naturally good at, but I just kind of got bored by. So that's how I wound up in tech partnerships, and I really enjoyed it. But when I was 37, someone called me a dino at work. I was like, wait a minute. Oh my
How did that
goodness.
come up?
Right. Well, it came up because I couldn't figure out how to put a GIF, like one of those, like, and I'm like, literally don't even know if it's GIF or GIF, like how you pronounce it, but those moving images.
Sure.
I couldn't figure out how to put it in Slack. And he was like, you dino.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, man,
Dude.
hey, dude. And then I was like, wait a minute, he's kind of not wrong. Like I looked around and I was one of the oldest people there. And that's what sparked this conversation for me. I started asking around, like, hey, are you guys seeing this? Is this just me? And pretty much to a person, everybody was like, no, it's an up or out culture in tech. And I realized that I had basically intuited this, and I'd been trying to find my way up the career ladder. And I had this instinct that if I didn't hit, director, senior director, VP by 40, that I was going to be pushed off the career tech ladder altogether. And even more so as a woman, like I didn't think I would have a seat at the table unless I had that sort of managerial title. So part ambition and part self-preservation, it was the desire to move up that ladder. But that's when I started thinking about my whole career. And I'd worked at other large companies like Bloomberg, for example, SAP Concur. And it wasn't just the VC-backed startups where I saw this. This was also a thing in the bigger tech companies where I'd worked. And yeah, the research that I did behind the scenes, just open conversations with people, everyone was feeling like this and concerned about it, and yet no one was speaking about it. And so while I was employed at a company that is not on my resume or my LinkedIn, so please do not go, because I don't want any of the things that happened there to be ascribed to other companies on my resume where this sort of stuff did not happen. But I had a horrible experience with this one tech company, and mentioned how abysmally they treated women at this company. And lo and behold, 9 business days later, they relocated my job, right? So, wonder what that was about. I'd been there for less than 3 months. But anyhow, when I was there, I decided to actually open up and have this conversation publicly on my podcast, which, by the way, was a terrifying thing to do. I was like, I have no idea how this is going to work out. I have no idea if anyone's going to listen. I don't know if I'm going to have a black mark on my name and no tech company ever will hire me again. But I've kind of figured stuff out my whole life. Like I've kind of landed on my feet. So I'm just going to go for it. So that's what I did in May of 2023 with It Gets Late Early. And like I said, I was very, very quickly thereafter pushed out of that company. And so since then, I have had this as my would have been side hustle, if you will, that became a full-time thing. And so here I am now in, I guess, what is called the creator economy, and trying to figure out what that means and how to make it work. So, and hopefully we'll make a big dent in the problem, because this is something that just needs to go away. It needs to be addressed head on, and companies are really going to be better off once they do so. And obviously everyone will be as well. So my hope is that we can all work as long as we want or need to, and that our worth and our value in the workplace is not perceived differently based on how many candles are on our birthday cakes. It's ridiculous. So.
Wow, great.
Yeah.
Question that came up as you were talking, in the companies that you worked in, what was the oldest person? How old was the oldest person or persons that you saw around those offices?
Not old. I mean, back when I was at Concur, I had a colleague, his name's John Parisi, and I actually had him on the show. And I started the show with an apology, a heartfelt one that was like, hey, John, I'm so sorry that I made fun of you for being the old guy at work at 51. And I was like, man, this is what we call karma. Now I'm in the ranks and I'm seeing this and I'm realizing how incredibly wrong I was to ever do that. And that's the thing about ageism. It's so embedded in our society. We don't even know that it's wrong. I mean, there's so many jokes out there. I don't know if any of you have seen The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway. Yeah,
I think most of us
great.
have it. We have it under our pillow.
I was moved to tears. I watched it recently and literally brought to tears, because these just microaggressions that are so casually thrown out, and the diminishing and the demeaning of people based on age. I mean, the movie is reflective of how society operates. And so, I mean, I'm aghast that I did that at one point in my life, but I also recognize that the reason I did it was that society had been giving me all of those messages, right? And John took it like a champ. He threw it right back at me, and we had so much fun, and he's the best. You guys should listen to that episode if you haven't. He talks about the realities of interviewing in your 60s in tech. But to your question, John, he was probably 51, and he was the old guy at the company.
Right.
And I mean, certainly it was a big company. I didn't know everyone at the company. There very well may, and I hope, were other people who were actually older than he was. But if there were, I'm pretty sure that they were in the director, senior director, VPC levels, which again is an up or out rather culture.
Yeah. Another quick, curious question. How did you come up with the title, It Gets Late Early, which is just really wonderful?
Thank you. So I came up with the title. It was really funny. I was talking to my social media video editor named Eric, who is very much in Gen Z and is amazing, and I adore him. And we were chatting because I was really excited. It was 2022, and the Seattle Mariners, my team, much to my chagrin, were actually going to perhaps make the playoffs for the first time in 21 years. And I was so excited. We're like, oh, it's October, postseason baseball. And suddenly, and I've been stewing over, like, what do I call this podcast? Like, I don't want to call it ageism in tech or something that's not exactly going to hit the mark. And I kind of wanted to soften it and not be so bold with that statement because I thought it might scare people away. And I just remembered that beautiful quote by Yogi Berra, "It gets late early out there." And I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's right. And I was on the phone with him as we were discussing baseball, and that's how it came up. And I do love the title. I really do. I hope that I think it's hard sometimes to get it to roll off the tongue well. And it doesn't necessarily describe exactly what the show is about, which I think, I don't know. It's a choice I made. I hope it was the right one. I can always rebrand, but that's how it came up.
Well, for what it's worth, it sets up this dynamic about if we don't, maybe it's back to baseball, if we don't keep our eye on the ball, it's gonna whiz past us.
Yeah.
Right. And that we get older sooner than we expect we're gonna get older.
Mm-hmm.
And
it comes out of nowhere.
right. And here we are thinking, oh, how did this happen? Right. Where did those years go by? And I'm sure that's the experience of most, if not all of us on this call. So that's why the title kind of resonates in this very kind of filigree, kind of trippingly off the tongue way. And of course, Yogi Berra, I'd forgotten about that. That's great.
Yeah. And sports.
The philosopher of our age.
Yeah. He's so funny.
So Leon Fisher has a question for us, and I'll throw it to you, Maureen, first. How do you think an IC, individual contributor, would be treated different from a manager director in terms of attaining employment and experiencing ageism in the hiring process?
I think that one other person on this call has an example of experienced living that. Vern, for example, you saw what that was like, and you had a post on LinkedIn that just went absolutely wild, all about your experience. And if you want to tell the story, you certainly can.
Let's bring Vern in. Vern is a kind of, I think, came to me through Maureen and is now a member of the Mid-Career Lab. And this is your first call, and I'm thrilled to have you on the call, Vern. So jump in, please.
Well, thanks. Yeah, Mo is I just want to really say, if y'all haven't checked out her podcast, it's amazing. The story for me was that, I was often brought in to help do screenings on, and I apologize, I'm just getting over a cold. The screenings were like, for like resumes and to do interviews and that sort of thing. And I would constantly be referred to as, what's the old guy think? And it was kind of funny because it was like, on one hand, I told Mo in the interview with her, was that it was kind of funny in some ways and flattering in others. But then when you really think about it, they're really kind of just not recognizing ageism. And so in those roles, I was a senior architect. I mean, I was the, very, very much senior. I mean, I reported directly to the CTO and, I was in charge of, multiple members of a team and all of that. And I can tell you that when you really think about what was being said there, it kind of stings a little bit. And I think that you'll kind of see that in different steps of the career. I think that if you're an individual contributor at this age, I think that it was evidenced by my event that caused, I think my post now is like over 4 million views. And, it's just crazy, and so, which is so funny in and of itself. But the fact that people see that you have to be at a certain level at a certain age, or you're just no longer useful. I think that's a very, very definite thing that has come out in the aftermath of my situation in February. And I've seen it and have talked to hundreds, literally, that have expressed the same thing. If you're not at a particular level with this much gray hair, then why are you even still in the market? And so I think that it's you know, it really doesn't matter where you are in terms of, you know, individual contributor. I think that you're going to kind of get hurt a little bit more if you're not at a particular step and just overcoming the realities of ageism. But I think that it's you know, it goes even, you know, to the higher levels. I mean, at manager level or individual contributor, you're both going to get kind of, you know, experience it. I don't know if I've articulated this very well, but that's
No,
kind
you
of been my
did.
experience.
Yeah.
Well, and what was so interesting about your story was the recruiter just came right out and said it to you. Like, I
Yeah,
can't
he
pitch
did.
you to
Yeah, he
clients
did.
because you're not at a CTO level or something. So
Yeah,
again, like people just freely say super ageist things without even thinking that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And if you
right,
if you subbed in race or gender, people's heads would explode. They'd be like,
right.
oh my God, right?
Yeah, can you imagine telling a recruiter you don't want to hire a Hispanic?
Oh my
Or do you
gosh,
want
no,
to, you don't want to hire, you know, an African American. You don't want to
right,
hire a gay or lesbian. But it's
Right.
okay to
right.
say, I don't want to hire anybody over 57.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
it just
yeah.
baffles my mind. I mean, it's like
Mhm.
it's totally accepted. And like Mo, like we talked about on the podcast, it was, you know, the mindset has to be changed. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, my son was very insightful. My son's a successful stockbroker and he's in his 30s. And he said, well, Dad, everybody in our age group views you guys in your age group as being very stoic and set in your ways, unwilling to change, unwilling to do whatever. And he gave me a whole litany of all these things that were stereotypes. And in some ways, he's not wrong. I mean, there are lots of things that I'm not going to do at age 57 with a broken back and, you know, the rest of those things. I mean, it's not, you know, I'm not going to go throw axes, you know, for the company get together.
Company event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But
No
you know, I want to be
axes?
invited, damn it, you know.
Yeah. Invite me.
But at any rate, I mean that's kind of that's my take on whether it be C-level, I mean at manager level or C-level even or individual contributor. I think that we're going to all have the experience of it, and that's the problem. I think is that we have to overcome not just the age thing, we have to overcome the other things surrounding it, like those things that, you know, like my son said, you know, they see us as not wanting to change, set in our ways, and you have to kind of address those individual stereotypes, I believe, to overcome the overall issue.
Uh,
Sure.
Bob Hicks had a question and then David Rapp. You're still muted, Bob.
It's a question and somewhat an observation is, if you're a senior level person and you're either at an existing company or you're looking to go to a new company, one of the considerations that comes into mind is, are you too expensive if you're not leveraging your expertise over multiple people? I'm an architect by training and practice, and so as a manager or a senior designer, if I wasn't able to lead a team of multiple people or multiple teams, perhaps on several projects, was it then just too expensive for a company to keep me on, as you say, as an individual contributor?
Well, I
And
think absolutely yes. I think in that case, if you're going to, you know, get the higher pay, then obviously with higher pay just needs to come higher responsibility. And I think that if you're at the individual contributor level, which is, by the way, where I love to be. I was a CTO previously and just did not enjoy that. But you know, I like being the architect level and I'm happy being an individual contributor. But the reality is that when you're a CTO and you're making, you know, $250,000 a year, you're an individual contributor making $150. You know, I'm thinking that, you know, you're gonna have to lower your standards on the income to be at that level. But I don't think that really has a whole lot to do with age. I think that has to do with, do you want to have the role that you want just because you've earned it or you've had experience with it? If you're always going to be an architect, then you should always get architect pay. I don't think it's just because you're older you're going to be less money. But if you're an individual contributor, you're probably not going to get as much as an architect.
I think one of the considerations, though, if you're being interviewed as an older person, is what is the interviewer's expectation thoughts about what you think you're gonna need for money, for salary.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you have to overcome that, but yeah, that's a hurdle. But I do think your pay should be based on what you're doing for the company. I don't think there's any expectation that you're going to be an individual contributor making the architect level. And but I agree with you. The company or the recruiter would think, oh well, that person is going to demand the higher rate.
There's a scene in Mrs. Doubtfire, the Robin Williams film, where he quits his job, and because he wants to spend time with his children, and he quits his job and takes a much lower level job within an ad agency, and tells them, no, I don't want to be, I don't want any seniority. I want to be a junior person. And I don't know in interviews or when we're looking whether any of us would bring that up as that. And then I'll be quiet, John.
No, this is a great point. And David, if you will excuse me, I want to ask Nancy Shaw, who's on the call, to go on camera if she could and unmute, because this was a question that she had earlier today in a conversation that she and I were having on the Mid-Career Lab about this question of, are you overqualified for the position? And if you're overqualified and you're willing to take a quote unquote lesser position, what about the compensation? And what is this calculus that you're kind of going through to try to figure out, well, how do I fit in? Is this going to work for me? Can I keep multiple options open, or do I have to make a compromise? So Nancy, if you would just jump in, that would be great.
Yeah, it is exactly my question that I'd like to hear people talk about, because my situation is that I was a VP of operations and I was in that role for 4 years. And prior to that, I was in senior level roles. And so people that know me would expect that I would want another senior job. I'm 61 years old, so I am experiencing that feeling of, I want to keep working. I wasn't even ready to stop, but I was let go. And so now I'm feeling like, okay, so I don't need to do that big job anymore. Maybe I don't want to be that tired and worn out all the time anymore, but I do want to work, and I do have a target salary in mind, which is probably about half of what I was making before. But what I find is that when I approach people or when I send in applications, I'm just like, I've had a couple of interviews and I get through sort of the first couple of rounds, but then I'm finding I'm not successful in the end, and someone else gets the role, and I figure out who that person is, and I think, yeah, I'm more qualified than that person. I wonder why they were chosen as opposed to me. So I hate to think it's ageism, but I'm starting to come to that conclusion.
Probably is. They probably think that, a younger person has more trajectory, right? Or all sorts of outdated reasons. Nancy, stay on here. And I want to get David into the conversation for his input. There's a lot of things we can discuss around this. And then I also want to get Maureen's perspective as well.
Hey, good morning. Hey, just wanted to, I had a little bit of a counterpoint to this, and this was my last role that I had. I was a subcontractor to a extremely large bank that everyone would know if I named it. And I worked in this small group where we were all project managers working on infrastructure. In particular, I was resetting all of the TVs and all of the displays and all of the rooms and all the conference rooms throughout the country. Long story short, I get on the call and everyone looks like me. They're 55 years old, they're bald. And I was like, oh my gosh. And the first thing out of my counterpart's mouth was, we don't do politics, we do not do turf. If you have a problem, you call us. We don't escalate. We don't go to the boss unless something's on fire. And we don't hire people under 35 because we're not going to retrain them. Do you understand? That was my opening thing. And they were all laughing. When our boss got on the call, He's about 45. He's got a thick head of hair. They're like, oh, here comes the hairy guy. He's going to lead us into the oblivion right off the cliff. I mean, it was the
That's
greatest.
ageist.
It was the
Yep.
Or
absolute
Harris or
great.
something.
We made fun of everybody who
Both.
was younger. Like
Yeah.
we would, I mean, it was terrible, but it
Mhm.
was such a great, and the thing was, like, even if we went up to like our executive director or above, our team was thought of completely different from everybody else. They're like, what's network infrastructure doing? They're all great. Okay, next. I mean, they would just go to the next team because they knew we could handle what we were handling. There weren't as many escalations. We had less trouble tickets, less complaints because they hired people with really knew what they were doing, and we handled everything in house. So there is some of that out there, but I think it's in a pocket. You got to find it. It's really hard to find those things because it's so not advertised.
Right.
Right.
It's
You're right.
culture. You're talking
It's
about culture.
And you're talking about banking, where I think ageism, you just described it perfectly. It goes against the young, not against the old, and banking and law and medicine, right? It's interesting how it does depend on the specific industry at hand and how we value experience. It's all relative.
Exactly. Now flip forward. Now I'm looking for a job, right? So now I'm out there looking for a job, and I already can tell that we're working with some of the different people that I've worked with based on all kinds of different metrics. But basically, my age really throws them off. You can tell they have a very hard time trying to articulate that, well, you know, you've got all this experience and you've done all this stuff. So they automatically think that I'm in the $125,000 to $150,000 range. And they're like, we don't have budget for you. You didn't ask me how much I wanted. How could I be out of budget already? You know, and I think that ties back to what Nancy said and what the other folks have said too, that it really comes down to the appearance of what you are. So I'm looking at a resume, reading between the lines. Now I got you in camera or in front of me. I don't have the luxury of makeup or really beautiful hair. So I have to just like be as I am. So what I try to do now is I try to come across as, look, I have done a lot of things. I've been in sales for 15 years, been a project manager for 15 years. I've done both at the same time. All I'm looking for is, what kind of role do you want someone in who doesn't do this? And I rattle off all the stuff you get with your, I show up and it rains. I don't have problems with my car. I don't have problems going to the office. I will fly and meet someone somewhere. And you rattle off the things now that a lot of people are just like, you would do that? I'm like, yeah, I would do that. So that's how I'm trying to separate myself now, is actually going back in time and throwing this stuff forward and saying, this is what's missing, I think. You know, we can't just Zoom call ourselves to death. At some point, you got to meet with people, right? So that's some of the things I'm trying to bring back. Of course, my results are pretty crappy right now, but I'm still convinced it's part of the process. So I was just curious to see what other people think.
Do you think that makes you seem desperate, willing to do all those things that most people in their age group don't want to do?
That's the dart, right? That's the dart gets fired from the blowgun you can't see. Is it desperation at this point? It's mild desperation. But on the other side of the coin, like you said, I think you said it great, Vern. There's a lot of things at 55 I'm not willing to do anymore. You know, I'm just not gonna do it.
Yeah,
And right, if you're gonna tell me here's their spreadsheet and go fill it out, I'm like, okay, go hire someone else. I got other things to do with my life to fill out your spreadsheets. You know, if you want me to work in a ticketing system, which one? Do I need snow tickets? I can do all that stuff. You want me to write JIRAs? I can do all that stuff. But no, I'm not going to do certain things. And I think that also makes it tough when you're working with some younger folks and recruiting and things. They're so used to a script. If you go off the script, they get lost quickly. That's what I see.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a
Really
great
strong
point.
point.
Actually. That is a great point.
So many issues here.
Yeah, where do we begin?
Yeah. What I want to say about all these questions, overqualified, desperate, I think for me, the way I work with people and the point of view that I try to bring across is a quality of intentionality and context, so that and I think, Vern, I think you asked the question that comes up is like, yeah, does this sound desperate to seemingly roll over on your back just to kind of get in the door? I think it goes back to value proposition, however, and I was talking with Nancy about this earlier. I think because we're older, on a certain level, we are intimidating to people. Our experience is intimidating because people don't understand what experience is. And they're looking at us and they're thinking, oh my God, what am I going to be like in the future? And there's all sorts of projection that goes
So
on
true.
that we
There's-
cannot control.
That's a great point, John.
Right?
That's a great
Yeah.
point.
So
We're a
I
reminder
think-
of their mortality as we age in front of them, and they're
well,
probably
not
insecure
even,
in
I
some
mean, I don't
ways,
think it
right?
even that's to go to mortality.
that dark.
I remember when I
Too
was
dark.
in my 40s, early 40s, and I was with, I mean, I'm gonna drop some Hollywood stuff here. So I was working as a talent manager, and Jeff Goldblum was a client.
Love Jeff
So-
Goldblum.
So
Love him.
and Jeff and I are exactly the same age. So
That's awesome.
we're on a photo shoot, and we show up with this photo shoot, and it's outdoors, and there's reflectors, and the photographer and the assistants. And I don't know how this came up, but maybe Jeff and I were kind of talking back and forth or something. And this young camera assistant overhears something. He says, "Wow, what's it like waking up at 40?"
Holy cow.
Right? And I just shot back. I said, "It's the same as waking up at 20."
Yeah.
Kind of like, screw
But-
you. Right?
Well, some
Yeah.
of that though, some of that actually happens because of our experiences. I mean, when I tell somebody I'm a former drill sergeant, well, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I'm a hard ass,
Right.
but I'm a nice guy,
Right.
so it's the same
Yeah,
thing.
but my point is, it doesn't have to be about mortality. It can just
Right.
be about the unknown and about the
Yeah.
bias and about this fear of the future, whatever that's going to
Mhm.
be. Where am I going to be in 20 years? Right? Am I going to be able to show up in 20 years? So that is an important mindset that I think we have to bring into those meetings with us and into those interactions. And I think also, because we're older, people expect more from us. They expect us to have more answers and to be more settled in a certain way and more certain and clearer and more contextual about it. So we have to kind of go the extra mile to explain why we want this particular position. And David, if you're willing to do all of these things, you want to come across as not desperate, but intentional about it. It's like, I want to go in the office because that's where I do my best work. And here's the chapter and verse about why I like to work this way. And I want to do these things, not because no one else will do them, but because this is how I get results. So in a way, you have to kind of seduce these people off of their scripts and get them into a real conversation with you about what matters. And I'll just say one other thing procedurally about this from a practice and a technique perspective, and that is, you want to put this stuff into your LinkedIn profile. You want to put this context into your LinkedIn profile. And I would encourage all of you, after the call, to look at your About section on your LinkedIn profile. If it is a straight outline bio of your skills and experiences without that context about who you are, where you come from, why you do what you do, what your motivation is, what your goals and ambitions are and aspirations are for the work that you do, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because in that mission statement is the script, your script for your job interview, where you get to guide them through your value and not have them go through this rote process of, so tell me about a time when you were challenged by something, whatever bullshit that is.
John, I just have to
Star.
say, bravo. That is probably I got that same feeling about it, and that's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've heard articulated since this whole
Thank you.
ordeal began. Yeah,
Love that.
good show. That was
Killer
great
advice.
advice.
We have to empower ourselves. I mean, we're not going to fix ageism today. If you were on the call yesterday with Maureen and Danielle and Bradley and I, Bradley Sherman is one of the most refreshing voices. His book, The
Love
Super
Bradley.
Age, is a demographer's look at the age bubble and the implications of an older population, and that 1 in 5 people is going to be over 65 in this country in a very short amount of time. So that's going to precipitate change. It's going to happen.
It has to.
It's going to take time. Companies are going to do this not because they want to or because they're aspirational, but because they have to, right? In the interim, and even afterwards, we have to step up. So we have to do the only thing we can do, which is, be clear, be more contextual, be definitive about what it is that we do. And unfortunately, as we were talking, Nancy and I earlier about this question of, well, the salary, we're going to have to make some compromises along the way in order to kind of stay in the game. So I think staying in the game at the end of the day, working more intentionally the way you want to work, is going to trump any kind of salary expectation you have or target that you're going to, a line in the sand that you're going to draw.
Well, I think there's a couple things I'd like to tack off that really quick. Robert, I know you've got your hand up, and Maureen, please chime in here, and anyone else. I think there's some components too that I am just retrenching in the last week. I got to see a great presentation. This is a woman I'm going to get you in touch with if you haven't heard from her already. But she runs a great strengths profiling thing, and she is absolutely outstanding. And I lost her name.
What's her name?
Brandy Shade.
Oh,
Brandy
cool.
Shade. SCH. I will put her out in the notes. Her presentation on strengths was beyond anything I have done. I took all my strengths profile, loaded into her system. You get 15 additional reports all the way down to what you should say in the interview to leverage your strengths. It will work for all of us. So I am trashing LinkedIn tomorrow and restarting it from scratch. So if you guys have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Because I think that's one of the things that it's also missing, is that a lot of times we go to an interview and we're on defense, right? If we walk in there and we're defensive, we're waiting for we're waiting for all the targets, we're waiting for the softballs, we're waiting for the hard balls. I'll keep continuing the baseball analogy, and sometimes they don't. That's not what they intend at all. Right? They're still reading from the script. They're trying to get the boxes ticked so they can move you on or move you off or figure out if they're going to get paid or not. That's their drive. It's not whether you get hired, whether they get paid. That's what they care about.
So true when it comes to recruitment agencies.
I really think
for the most part,
yeah. So I think there's an opportunity, like you just said, to really weaponize that group in your profile. And I think the way to do that is to really go after strengths. I can tell you, I cheated, went to AI and said, what are the top 5 characteristics for a great salesperson, top 5 for a project manager, and I merged them. That's what I've got out there now, but it does not read. It doesn't read well.
I think that's
weird.
important,
From
David.
ChatGPT?
And Bob, I want to come back to you, but I really want to say that is only one component, and your strengths are a metric, if you will. But I think that strengths alone do not trump the bias, which says, yeah, you've got strengths. Okay, that gets you in the door. Now we have to kind of figure out, based on our bias, who we're going to hire. Fact is that most hiring managers hire people like them.
Exactly.
Right?
Culture fit.
They say that older workers perform fantastically well, but at the end of the day, they hire people like them that they feel comfortable with. So strengths alone will not move the needle. You have to tell a more compelling story that gets them off of their position and broadens their mindset. Tough order we have, right? Just to flip and make a living, but that's the reality. And I believe it's possible. So Bob Hicks.
One of the points that I think has to be considered when you are being considered for a job, when you're in an interview or it's hard to do in an application process. But I know from a recruiter standpoint, and having done hiring in the firms I've been within, the question comes up at some point of how will this person fit into the company, fit in with the people who were there. The way I always summarize it, how well will they play in the sandbox? And I think
very appropriate.
That's a serious consideration particularly if you are older than majority of other people. You know,
Yeah, that gets to the culture.
is this old guy how's it gonna look? You know, and I think in an interview, and I don't know how you do it in writing, but you need to convey how you are going to be in the sand, how well you will play with the others in the sandbox, and what that relationship is. I got Maureen's laughing, which is a good thing. Is that a
It's so
reasonable
accurate
point,
what you're
Maureen?
saying. It's so accurate what you're saying. I actually would love to see the term culture fit abolished across all organizations, because what it means is more people like us, as John just said too. It's the way to keep your workforce homogenous. And I've seen this in practice. I've seen older applicants come through the door, go through interview loops, and be a part of these conversations. And who do they want to pick? The guy who's going to fit in more, their buddy, right? Who's about the same age. And I'm like, but what about, I remember actively advocating for someone who was probably 15 years older than everybody else on our team. And I was like, this guy has the experience. We should pick him. Guess what? I was overruled. They wanted the younger guy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all about age, but the thing is, it's subconscious a lot of the times, right? And people think energy, hunger, like vigor, all of that, rock star, all the things, and they ascribe that to youth. And that's not something that they can put on older people. And it's a very prevalent bias, and it's hard to undo, but we have to keep on talking about it so people become more aware of their subconscious and unconscious biases around this. But culture fit as a term is something that's hugely detrimental, I believe. I mean, especially in these very early stage VC backed startups where it's just all about the founder, who in many cases is a young person who's,
It's
I don't,
bro culture.
it's the bro culture. It 100% is. And I've seen it play out, and they hire their friends. And I've been dying to get someone from the VC world on my podcast, because all of this rolls downhill from VC. Where are they? Why are they not advocating for their early stage founders and their portfolio companies to actually hire across a wide range of experience? Why aren't they telling them that this is how you get better outcomes? Why aren't they exposing them to the knowledge that they could receive from having people with more experience in their organizations? Like, it's just such a huge miss. And a lot of me thinks it's that money factor again. But getting back to some of what we've been discussing is, the assumption that people make that you will be too expensive, right? And what I am curious about is, now we have published salary data on a lot of these jobs, right? And I understand that the reason that those are published and the mechanisms by which they are done so is by virtue of these salary sort of bands within the organization per title. That's what they're actually displaying. So it's not necessarily like if they say they have a job for 100 to 250K, that means they have a budget of up to 250K for that role. That is simply describing what the people inside the organization make at that particular level. I mean, the disparity being that wide, huge problem in my mind, but they're not saying in that listing, hey, we have up to 250 for you, which is something that I learned recently, and it does make sense. But my view on this is, if you are advertising a job with an age band, and a candidate comes into the interview process and says, I want something in here, you should give them a fair shake. And I think a lot of people use the concept of, oh, you'll be too expensive, or, oh, you're overqualified, as a way to just push you out of the process. And it's sort of one of those, I don't know if it's intentionally done necessarily, right? But it's just under the surface. And this is an assumption that people will continue to make. So I think, and John, obviously you have much more expertise in this arena than I do, but my understanding, or my concept here, would be, if we as older people applying for jobs can lead with our expectations of salary, and maybe dissuade them from believing that we might be more expensive than they think we would be, right? Like, if we have that open conversation, could that help us? Is that something? Because I would advocate that as a possible way to
I mean,
get around it.
what you're describing is the orthodoxy of corporations, these unquestioned assumptions that people within companies make about value and about salary and about hierarchy and bureaucracy and all that. Hard to interrupt that. I would say that I just lost my train of thought, that the real question is value, is to interrupt the pattern through describing your value in a way that kind of cuts through all of those obstacles. And those obstacles are not just up for you or for us. They're really up for everybody. There is this challenge. And I think younger people starting out encounter their own version of these same obstacles, but flipped, where you don't have enough experience.
Exactly.
I have no way of knowing how good you are. Do you really have the maturity to do this job? A lot of the stuff that Danielle was talking about on the call yesterday. So there are obstacles throughout this, and kind of reminds me of my studio executive days. I used to have this pin that someone made for me, which said "License to say no," and I realized that all I could do was say no. I couldn't say yes. I didn't have the power to buy a script or to greenlight a movie, but I could say no. And that was what my job was. So the job of a lot of these hiring managers and recruiters is to say no. They're looking for ways to say no. So your job is to diminish their ability to say no.
That's brilliant. I love that reframe.
We only have a few more minutes, and this has been a great conversation. And
Really
I
has.
do want to cover something which we haven't talked about, which is entrepreneurship, solopreneurship. And Maureen, now having found herself in this creator economy, solopreneur world, what does that look like? And what can you share with us about those prospects as you're looking ahead, to the next decades in your work, about how this plays out and how can we all think of ourselves in a more mosaic-like way as we start to explore career possibilities. Side gig is too much of a cliche. I think it's more of a portfolio, approach to career. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think whether we like it or not, it's quite likely that we will all have to have some sort of a portfolio career element to our future of work. It's how companies are moving. The gigification of jobs, even in white collar industries, that's happening. And we know it. We see it in front of us. We know that the fundamental relationship between corporate and employee, it seems pretty broken to me. And people are aware that there's no safety net. So I intended to have my podcast be something that I ran concurrently with doing my full-time job. As I explained, I lost that job and suddenly found myself with a lot more time to focus on this. And to be clear, unfortunately, podcasting, unless you are Joe Rogan or I forget her name, Alex something rather, who does Call Her Daddy, it's not exactly like a huge moneymaker out of the gates. You can get there eventually, but it's not an overnight type of thing. But most people starting a podcast or something like this do so to support and create lead flow for an existing business. And what I did was have a conversation that I thought would become a platform that would then become some sort of business in some way, shape, or form. And I was just kind of open to seeing where that would go. What I didn't really realize I was doing was creating a platform that would make me a part of what everyone calls the creator economy. And what that is content essentially, and being able to monetize or create revenue. I hate the term monetize, but create revenue off of content. And so what has happened organically as a result of the platform that I've been building, growing, is with that growth has come inbound interest from brands who want to work with me, which is great. I've also basically become had a lot of expertise in this particular arena that is also useful potentially as someone who can go do workshops with corporations everywhere and have conversations about this specific topic. So there are consulting avenues out of this, there are brand partnerships out of this. There are other avenues that I could partake in. And what I've learned about the creator economy is that most people who are in it have a variety of different sort of income streams that are off of the back of that. So I am at a point now where that is happening for me, which is really exciting. And it was something that I just had a hunch and I kept going for it, and it has played out. So I feel like when it comes to portfolio careers, it's something, and I know we talked about this on your episode of my show, John, and you said you're never going to be unemployed if you have your own LLC. You are, John Tarnoff, LLC. And that stays on your resume forever. That stays on your LinkedIn forever. You can consult, you can advise, you can do whatever. You're never unemployed if you do that. And I think what happens with so many people, as I'm sure you talk about often on this lab itself, is that people get hit out of nowhere. People who've been at a company for a long time suddenly find themselves jobless, and they haven't necessarily built up their platform or even their portfolio of what they've done. They've been focused on that employer that they've been working for. And unfortunately, what happens is that can be to people's detriment, right? And they don't have the body of work. They don't have sort of the know-how or the recent network warmth or any of that will help them. And so if you basically take John's advice and start now building that up, start now creating your own LLC, you're never going to be unemployed. It's going to help you weather the storm a little bit better and get out in front of what could potentially be coming your way, which lends itself to that whole portfolio career notion. And if I can urge anyone here to just do the thing, if you can, just start small and take some sort of risk. I think the beauty of aging for me is I've realized even when things don't go all that well, like I do eventually land on my feet. And, yesterday with John, had a huge tech blunder. Like I could not get LinkedIn Live to work to save my life. And John was there advising me step by step, extremely patiently. And it was just so humorous and perfect because we were talking about 4 generations in the workplace. And we were displaying for everybody to see how that stereotype about older people not being able to do tech and me being a digital native, how that's wrong. So it was amazing. But I thought to myself, I would have melted down completely. I would have been probably in tears, flushed, so upset about this public fail. And yesterday I was like, it's fine. It's cool. It's going to be all right. And I just went through it and it was totally fine. So that's the power of aging. It brings you a lot of confidence. Everything's going to be okay. So just try to do something. If you've been sitting on the sidelines for a while, take the first step. That's the only way we get experience anyway. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I want Vern raise his hand. I'm going to give him the last word.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing to it that maybe isn't exactly obvious, but I don't even think Mo knows exactly. But there's like a butterfly effect. I mean, everything that she's doing. I mean, I have the luxury of having received, since my event happened, hundreds of thousands of emails, literally. So, and obviously, I haven't read them all yet. But I can't tell you how many times.
Put them through ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly. I can't tell you how many times this young lady has been mentioned in the emails, like trying to say, Vern, have you seen this girl Maureen, and maybe you need to connect up with her about this and that. And my point being is, keep doing it. Keep doing it. You have no idea who's behind the scenes supporting you, and who's behind the scenes just pushing your stuff out there. I mean, making the content, or at the very least, commenting on LinkedIn or posts on LinkedIn, or working your network. Just it's you don't always know how you're being promoted.
Exactly. You never know where the opportunity is going to come from.
That's really nice of you. Thank you, Vern. I appreciate that.
Everyone, thank you so much for showing up. We are at time, and there will be a recording that will be posted. I think I can squeeze it into the LinkedIn event, back into the LinkedIn event, even though it was not recorded on LinkedIn. And it will be on the Mid-Career Lab as well, and it will be on the YouTube channel. And I will also have the chat in there, as well as the notes summary from this. So be sure to tune in, same time, same place next month. And thank you so much for showing up. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
This was a blast. Thank you so much for having me. And nice to meet you guys. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Vern.